recording. So I'm recording the video of it. And so basically what we're going to do is I have a box right now, but I'm going to do two different versions of a dangling arm, right, underneath this. So imagine that this is like some sort of robotic, like sentient box, right? And, well, let me minimize this thing. So there's a robotic sentient box. And there are two different versions of the arm that I'm going to use. One is just sort of a single like piece for an arm, and then we got this little claw at the end of it so it can pick stuff up or whatever, right? And then the other version of that arm is sort of a segmented arm, right? Three pieces and the claw, right? So I'm going to show you, like we kind of already saw the simple version of what I'm going to do with the three pieces, but I'm going to show you again mainly just so we can get into that node view, we can understand what it is, we can understand how we're going to use it, right? So, the node view is, if you're not familiar with where it's at, I'm going to rearrange mine a little bit more, pull this over here, lower down my timeline, that way I have more room over here. The node view is right here, so usually it's with your color palette. If you can't find any of these menus, you can usually hit this plus sign right here and find all the different menus. So the two things we need are the node view, and then later we'll also need this node library. So I'll go ahead and copy it in there too. I actually usually, when I have two screens, I just have one on one screen and one on the other. But these are all of the different nodes that we can use in the node view. There's a lot of stuff in here. Basically, the way to think of this, if you've not done any 3D work, the way to think of this is kind of like filters or effects or tool, I guess we could also call them tools, in Photoshop, right? Like you need a blur, well, we'll drop a blur node in there, right? And you'll see it right here. It's a Gaussian blur. And I can drop that into the node view, and it's like a filter that it runs before it displays it on my screen, right? There's also, it's also the hierarchy view though. So there's just a lot of stuff in here. The node library is just, you can kind of browse through it and see all the different stuff that we get, including particles. Like we can make fire in here, simulate particle physics with like fire, water. There's a lighting option in here where we can make our objects kind of rounded, and then we can put real-time lights in there and cause them to cast shadows. I can show you that a little while later. I got it to work a little bit. I wasn't completely, I don't think that style works with my illustration style, or at least the illustration style I was using to test it. But there's a lot of different things you can do in here, so you don't have to recolor for lighting for every frame. You can just have this real-time light that changes colors, right? So there's just a lot of different things that we can do with these different nodes. So don't worry about them yet. There's just, know they're in here in this node library. We can go get them later. What I'm going to do is look at the node view. And again, as soon as you get in here, it's going to look like what is that, right? And you'll start seeing it's all tangled up. I don't know why it doesn't just automatically untangle. What I usually do is just drag and select everything, and then I click this button here. You can do it the other way, but what this is going to do is it's going to organize all of those nodes I have selected from a top-down standpoint, right? You can change this if you want to, but I just usually hit OK. The space bar will let me pan around. So you'll see that the single arm is currently hidden, and that's just, or it's red because I had it turned off, right? So that will let you know, like if it's red, that means you're not actually going to see it. So just to kind of show you what I'm talking about with some of these nodes, I'll drag this out here to a different section here. Let's say I went to the Gaussian blur, right? Most of you know what a Gaussian blur is. It's just like in Photoshop, it's a filter you can run that turns whatever it is you had blurry, right? You can blur it a little bit, you can sharpen it, whatever. Let's do this on the box, and I'll just show you what I'm talking about here. So the box is called base, right? So I can drag one of these Gaussian blurs in here. And if I drag again, this is, you'll get more familiar with this, but if the line is blue, it has to do with its visibility. If it's green, it has to do with it's like physical control, like your movement, your rotation, right? So you can have a node, like both of those are controlled within the same node editor. So if I unplug base from composite, it disappears. It's still there, but it disappears, right? And if I plug that in to Gaussian blur, right, I still don't see it because I'm not plugged into the composite node, and what we're seeing right now in our viewport is the display. Right? I'm gonna move this down here a little bit. So if I move this from the Gaussian blur into the composite node, you'll see that I can see it again. It doesn't really seem like it's changed, right? Well, that Gaussian blur has properties. If I select it, I go to my layer properties. It's right here. And I can turn up my blurriness. In fact, this is something I can animate. I can make it more or less blurry. If I put that up to 10, believe it or not, that worked. We just don't see it yet. And the reason we don't see it is we would only see that effect once it's rendered. So if I click this little button here to render the view, you'll see I blurred it, right? So if I want to make it look like your character's waking up from being in a coma or whatever, and like its vision is blurry, right? And slowly becomes clear. Maybe I step it down to 5, down to 1, down to 0, right? And we can animate that number, right? So this is effects we can use. The interesting thing is, because the reason it's important to have this as a node instead of a layer, like in Photoshop, is I can reuse the same drawing, right? So check this out. I have my base drawing here, right? I'm going to go ahead and turn my Gaussian blur up to something kind of higher, like let's say 6, right? So we got a little bit of a blur there, right? So I have my base drawing here. It's going through the Gaussian blur and then into the composite and then out to my right node here, which is what I'm seeing in the viewport, right? Well, I don't have to just have it going to the Gaussian blur to get to the composite. I could also have it going straight into the composite. So I have one drawing and I'm getting a blurry version and a clear version, right? So you can kind of see it's got a little bit of a glow around it now, right? And so this is, let me sort of show you again. I can put it behind it and get a crisp version with the blurry version on top. I can put it in front of it, go the other way around. So there's just a lot we can do to kind of get an effect in here, right? And this is just with the blur. So this is why we have these blur or these nodes, is because I can mix and match my drawings and get a lot of benefit out of them. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that Gaussian blur. I just wanted to show you that was, I think it's easy to see the effect that way, right? I'll bring back my node library if I need it. Right now I don't think I do, because we can get most of those just by right-clicking in here, and I think it's insert, and then here's all of my nodes as well. So the first thing I need to do with this is I need to make sure all of, my base is in there twice. I need to make sure all of my arms are in here in the right order, right? And so right now, arm 1, which is that topmost arm, is on top of arm 2, and then arm 2 is on top of arm 3, and it just doesn't look as good. So again, as you saw earlier, I can just change the order that they go into the composite node, and have 3 go first, 1 go there. And so now that's just a little prettier, right? I like how that looks better. All of what we have here allows us to sort of visually see what's going on in our scene, right? And so I usually like to organize this in a way that I understand that, right? So like however it's plugging into the composite node, I'm not really that concerned about. What I want to know is how is it going to control one another, right? And so right now, the way I would want to animate this is in this order, right? My base is the main thing that I would move, and I want the rest of those arm pieces and that claw to go with it, right? And so I'm just going to sort of arrange it in my view there so I can see it that way, right? Before I do any of this connecting them together, though, I want to make sure that my pivot points are in the right spot, right? So again, I'm going to go to my move tool for each of these layers. My base, I'm going to go ahead and put the pivot point for that where I want it to be. So let's say right there. And then for each of these, I'll just sort of step down. Arm 3, I always like to click it so I can see which one's which. So arm 3 is down here. That's where I would like it to rotate from. Okay. So if I rotate this, why are you not working, arm 3? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I still have it in the render mode. Okay, there we go. So we can see it a little bit better. Thank you. And so I just got to position that to where when I rotate it, it's rotating the way I want it to. And I'll do that with each of these. Arm 2, that's definitely the middle one. And then arm 1 is the top one. Let me get this. Okay, but as it is right now, this is, oh, and I should do the claw too. And the claw, I want it to pivot from right about there. In fact, I kind of like that claw to be on top. No, I like where that's at. Or do I? Yeah, I like that better. So now when I rotate the claw, it's a little bit like that. Feels better. Okay, so I just need to get those pivot points in the right spot. And now, like, rigging this together is a lot easier, right? I know that I want the base to control arm 1. Right? So I can drag out of the bottom of this again, and I know that's the blue line, but if I try to plug that into the top here, you'll see that it gives me the option for transformation. Right? If I plug over here, it's matte. I don't know what that is. That's actually new to me. I'll have to look at that. So that's not about visibility. I bet this is so you can mask stuff out. That used to be an additional thing, so I'll have to research that a little bit. Which I believe what it is you can use one drawing to cut out another drawing. So this is very similar to that cutter tool, but again, I'll have to research this. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this into transformation. Right? And what you'll see now is that if I rotate my base, my arm goes with it, and then if I rotate my arm 1, it stays with it, right? So we can sort of build this rig. So I know you're kind of familiar with all this. I just want to show you how to do it in here. So again, I'm going to drag arm 1 to arm 2 to arm 3, arm 3 to claw. And so now what I should have is a full rig of this pendulum, right? And if I want to start animating that, I could do that. I could animate my base moving across. I could grab my arm 1. I can rotate that up like this. Arm 2 like this. Arm 3 like this. The other thing is I can use my node editor as a way to select these objects too. So I could click on claw. So like this is a nice way to just be able to go through here and select everything and kind of use this as a picker for my objects, right? And I can just start getting this in whatever pose I wanted to. So, but that's a little slow. Like to rotate this arm, I have to go click here, then I go over here and I rotate it, and then I want to do the claw, I have to click here and then rotate it. So it's taking me at least 2 clicks to move each object, right? So let me go ahead and undo this a little bit and show you a little bit of a quicker way. Okay? The quicker way is this button right here. It kind of looks like a kite. See right there, like right below the box. It's a little like diamond shape with like a crisscross in there. What that's supposed to look like is a joint, not a bone, like a hinge, right? I know that doesn't look like that at all to you, but that is sort of the way that they have been drawn in 3D programs for a long time. It's sort of this. You're not real. I don't know anybody in Lewiston, New York. I don't know why I feel compelled to talk to my phone when it gives me a fake phone call. We could have answered it and talked to them. But this is a a bone, a deformation joint, right? It's a way of creating a hinge on something. And when I mouse over it, you'll notice that something popped up. It said, let's see, right here, it says inverse kinematics, which probably to you sounds like a bunch of made up words, right? Inverse means, flipped, right? The opposite, right? And kinematics is a word that we use in computer graphics to represent a hierarchy chain, like a chain of control, right? So don't sweat that part too much. All it really means is that if I click that button, I now have a visual of the joints that are inside of my, or the pivots that are inside of my rig, right? And this is cool because I can now manually start moving these in my screen, right? With this IK tool, I can go in here and click these and start rotating. Now you notice that's all I'm getting at first. When they're locked like this, sometimes they're kind of hard to break loose. I know that sounds crazy, but if you hold Alt at first, or maybe it's, sorry, yeah, Alt, I can start manually rotating them and get sort of my first pose. And after I get my first pose, it starts to understand how I want to move these, right? So when I'm ready to get my second pose, I can just grab the end of this and start moving it around however I want to, okay? So we get a little bit more of a puppet. So I can go up here and get all of this into this pose. If you want to just rotate one, you hold down Alt and you can sort of manually get to that position. And so this is a really quick way to pose my character. Now let's say I go out here and I'm ready for my second pose. I can grab these, rotate it all the way down to here. It's kind of hard to flip it the other way, so usually I just use the Alt key again to get my pose over here. And now I have this object doing this, okay? So it's very quick to be able to get this. Again, though, the problem with this for most people is that they see this as it only works with a character that's broken up into pieces, right? A lot of your drawings you'll be able to do this. You may have to be creative about how you do it, but even like I've seen people do this with like a character's jaw, right? Where you draw your line versus where you draw your fill color. You can actually still just use your jaw as a hinge that opens and closes, right? And you won't notice a difference. But some stuff you just can't do that way, and that's the other thing I'm going to show you here in a minute. But I did want to show you this. Each of these are now being controlled by this IK. It's really just another way of going through here and manually rotating each of these. It's just faster. There we go. There we go. Oh, it's because I have them all selected there. There we go. So it's just a faster way of doing that. So again, we can go into here, sort of pose this how we want, Alt to get the manual rotation on it. And this is a very quick way of getting my animation, right? Now, one of the problems with this, though, is sometimes you want something very dynamic, right? Let's say I want that claw to open and close, but I wanted to do it in a really like exaggerated way, right? Let's say I want it as it's coming past this point right here. Let's sort of do this differently. I'll do this pose different. Excuse me. So I'm going to have it look like it's swinging through and grabbing something. But right before it grabs, I want it to feel like it opens the claw a little bit bigger. Right? I want to change this entirely just so it makes more sense, right? So I want it to feel like it sort of swoops through and grabs something right there, right? So there's a couple of different things I could do, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to frame by frame just do some different drawings with that claw, right? There's nothing that says I have to have that same image for every animation of my frame. So this is a little hard to see because they're going to be happening on the same layer. There's actually a way of rigging this that makes that easier. I'm doing it this way because sometimes you'll forget to do that, and I want you to know the hard way of doing it. It's less rigging, but a little harder when it comes to animating. So basically, when I click on my timeline here, let's zoom in here so we can see it. When I click on my timeline, I'm on the claw layer, right? I click right there. Right? There are two things that are happening there. On our claw layer, our claw drawing layer, there is one image of that claw that I've drawn, right? We call that image an exposure. This is from 2D animation when you would expose the cell to get it onto the frame, right? You may have a whole stack of drawings, but for that particular part of the animation, you only had one exposure of that drawing, right? And so that's the only exposure drawing of that claw. Well, we talked about that a minute ago. Somebody said that they were making changes to their drawings. I think it was Robert. So they're making changes to their drawings and it was affecting the other drawings. And that's because that exposure exists so we can reuse it, right? I may want to use that drawing of that claw again later down the road. So if I draw over it, like basically Toon Boom is just keeping that drawing as a separate file that it can plug in here wherever it wants to. You can see that because I can go to my file where I'm working here, Marlowe, Regging Class, 2018, Week 1, Elements, and you'll see right here. I probably have to save this before it updates the names. There we go. You'll see in my elements that I have this claw drawing, right? Or this claw folder. And I have arm 1, arm 2, I have all those other things from when I was using this file for something else. And if I go in here to the claw folder, you'll see that I have claw 1 TVG, right? That means there's one exposure drawing. That's actually a vector file, just like an Illustrator file. It's a simple version of it. And it saves one of those for every drawing that I do, right? And that is our exposure, our exposure of that drawing, or our exposure drawing, yes. So if I go in here and just click right here before, and I click this button right here, create an empty drawing, it's going to make our claw disappear. That layer is still there, the claw is still there from before, but I can draw whatever I want to here, right? Let's go ahead and just draw something like that, right? And that's our new exposure for that layer, right? So now that layer has two exposure drawings. When we were doing frame-by-frame animation, basically we were just doing new exposures over and over and over again, right? New exposure drawings. And if you go and look in your elements folder there, you'll see that your drawing layer just has a whole bunch of TVG files in there. Now, this is important because I can do this multiple times, right? Like I could go here and I can create a new empty drawing, right? I can make this one just the letter G, right? Because that's the letter my name starts with. Or I can go back here to this previous claw, right? And instead of clicking this button, I can click the duplicate drawing button. And basically what this does is it creates an empty drawing layer, or it creates a new, sorry, not a new layer. It creates a new exposure that looks exactly like this other exposure, right? So I can click that one, right? And now it looks like nothing changed, but that's actually a different drawing. And the way you can tell is if I erase part of this, it didn't affect the previous one, right? And so I can continue to go in here and I could change the way this this thing looks here. Something like this. And in my fill bucket, fill that. All right. And so now what I get is it switches to that drawing, and then once we get to here, it goes to this thing, right? Well, maybe I don't want that one. Maybe I actually want it to be back to that previous drawing again. So this is where this exposure method becomes very handy. So you've noticed that we have our tools property, our layers property. What you may have not noticed is this little one in between here, this library. And what it looks like is like a place to store some elements or files or whatever. And it is that. You can bring in stuff from Illustrator. Let's say you make a whole bunch of character designs or whatever. You just want to have those all stored in your file. You can store those in there. But what I want you to look at is not necessarily our library, but this thing right here, right? This little element right here. This says drawing substitution. And you'll see that it's the claw layer, and you'll see that we're on drawing number 2, right? Now if I go back here to this new drawing I drew, you'll see that's drawing number 4. Right? And if I go out here to this one, that's drawing number 1, right? Well, let's say I wanted to change this exposure that I've put in here back to my original drawing. I can just slide this element until I get back to there. And so now what I get is it's open and it's closed, right? Let's say I don't want that. Let's say I actually wanted to make this a completely different drawing where it's grab something, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, select this and click this duplicate drawing or duplicate drawing. You'll notice that when I do this, my call number up here will change, probably to 5, I think. Yeah, 5. So now this is exposure 5, and I can change exposure 5 to something else. I could go in here and, what's a good way of doing this? Probably with this cutter tool. Go in here and sort of slice that, right? And then use that as, that didn't work. I guess I gotta use the cutter. Go in here and slice that. I can move my pivot point on that and sort of collapse that in tighter, right? Sort of the same with this side over here, maybe. That in tighter. And then I can go in here with my eraser, sort of erase that part there, and redraw in the way those pieces connected. Colors, sorry, I just don't have enough screen real estate right now. Something like this. Maybe like that, yeah. Sort of color that in just a little bit more. All right. Here we go. And again, that's just drawing exposure 5, right? So now what I get is that to that, and then it switches to G again. Maybe I don't want G, maybe I'll go ahead and put this out here again to drawing 5, keep it on that, right? All the way to the end, and then maybe right about here, I just have it open up again to release whatever it is, like it's throwing it, right? So I can just go back until I find that. And so what I'm doing is, I'm just doing a little bit of a frame-by-frame drawing on top of that rig, right? Nico, when you were having your character snap their fingers, that's kind of what I was saying there. You could just rig that hand because you already have that frame-by-frame drawing on there. And so you can get a combination of all of that, right? And so if we look at this all together, we get, it's going to play for infinity. There we go, let's go back. So it's just, that's by no means a good animation. I'm just showing you kind of what you can do with it, right? Now, I'm going to go back and unrig some of this. Actually, I may not. What I may do is just duplicate this claw layer, just hide the stuff that we currently have. So I'm going to show you another way to rig this again. And I'm going to do this one with the single arm. So let me trim all this back. There we go. So with this single arm, I'm going to turn on all this other stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to duplicate this whole thing. Duplicate selected layers. So I got base. It's a new base layer. I'll go ahead and delete my keyframes out of that because I don't really need that anymore. And I still need this claw, so I'll go ahead and duplicate it as well and put it down here and get rid of all those keyframes. Delete keyframes. Just to make this simpler so it doesn't get confusing, I'm actually going to delete all of these frames. So here's the cool thing about this. I'm going to hit F5 to extend it all the way out there. The cool thing about this is, although I just deleted all of those all of these exposures of my drawings here, those drawings are still there. I can still substitute all of those in, right? Just right now, the only one I'm seeing is this one exposure of claw 1, right? So I wanted to show you this. Go ahead and minimize all this. So you could ignore that first thing we did. Basically, this is just a duplicate of all of those things again, except now my arm is a single piece, right? And so I wanted to show you another way, like, I can't really break that up and always make it seem like a single piece, right? So this is a whole new section of Toon Boom we haven't really looked at before, called deformers, right? So I'll hide the claw and the base just to sort of show you how this works. So a deformer can be found up here in these rigging tools. So it's this little hammer and this wrench. So if I click there, I need to be on my single arm layer, right? And look in my tools properties, there's a few things going on in here, right? If I just leave it on this automatic mode, it will choose which mode it thinks is best. But there are actually 3 different modes. I'm going to show you 2 of them to kind of understand how these work. So basically what a deformer is, it's a hierarchy chain too, very similar to how we had that, that chain of joints that we could rotate, except they're not just controlling the object's transformation. It's a sort of this system that will warp the object, and you can animate parts of that deformer to get your warp. Right? So let me show you. I'm going to first just use the joint version, bone and articulation mode. So if I click that, you'll see that my cursor sort of changed to this little circle with a hole in it. Right? I'm going to click at the top, and you'll see I get a little dot there. I'm going to go down a little bit further and click again, and I'll get another dot. Right? And you see like it's got a circle connecting these. I'm just going to do that a few times. And so I get this like similar, it's like made out of strings instead, right? Or lines instead. And it's a similar chain, right? So if I just grab this and move it, I'm really just changing the location of it. So that's not really what I want. But that's because I'm still in the rigging mode, right? This is sort of like the setup mode. If I decide this is not where I wanted that part, I can move that. I can move this until I get them all in the right location for the deformation I'm wanting. I actually want this last piece to be a little shorter, just personal preference reasons. I think that looks better on the animation. Right, so that first piece is a little longer, the next one's a little shorter, the last one's a little shorter. So once I have all of these though, I can go out of this rigging tool and click. If I click that, it's still just going to stay in it. The best way to go out of it is to go to the tool that you're going to use to deform this, which is just our transform tool. So if I click that, that is still there, and I can grab these individual points and start warping my object, right? There we go. Now the cool thing about this is these little circles here, I can expand those and sort of soften that fall off as well. It also stretches it a little bit, so that's not really that great. If I go back to my rigging tools, I think I can expand these a little bit more while it's still in that rigging mode, and then when I go back to this mode, it's a little softer of a deformation without warping the object. But yeah, if I wanted to get a little stretch on it, I can do that as well. And so this is a way that I can animate the same joint chain with a deformation instead. Now, unfortunately, if I turn those other objects on, they're not doing anything with it, right? They're just sort of staying where they were. So I'm going to undo this and get me back to sort of my default mode of this, right? Again, I'll go back in here and maybe expand these out a little bit to get my fall off a little softer. So, I'm just testing to see what that looks like. Yeah, that's looking pretty good, right? So what you'll notice is I have now my base, right? And then I have this deformation single arm system, right? And then I have the single arm drawing, and then I have the claw, right? I'm not going to do anything to that single arm drawing anymore, so I can lock it. Really what I'm animating now is this deformation system, so I don't want to accidentally, like if I grab the arm and it wasn't locked, in theory I could move that and mess some stuff up. Let's see if I can still do that. Yeah, and so now my deformation is not going to work correctly, right? I mean, unless that's what you want it to do. So I don't really need to be able to animate the actual drawing anymore, so I'm just going to lock that layer so I don't accidentally do anything. So the problem with this is they're not connected, right? If I grab the base, I try to move the base around, that arm doesn't go with it. Right? So that means we have to go back to that node view, right? Node editor. So I'm going to go back to my node view, and we're going to ignore all this stuff over here. Again, I'm just going to arrange this a little more clearly again. Okay. And so what you can see is all of this stuff over here, that's that old rig that we were working with. I can just move it out of the way. I don't need to even worry about that. Right? These are the things I need to worry about. I have my base, right? I have this single arm deformation, right? And then I have the single arm drawing, and then I have my call. Now, unfortunately, I can't just plug, like I can plug my base straight into the single arm deformation. Right? And now if I move my base, that whole deformation goes with it, and I can also still manipulate this. The problem with that is I can't really just do the same from the deformation out to the call. I can, but when I plug it into the call, what I'm actually going to get is that the deformer is going to deform the call too. Right? So you see how the call is getting this weird stretch to it? So if I really just still want that to be a parent, like I want it to be like controlling the location of it, I need another node, and it's called a kinematic output node. Now the reason this is, let me kind of explain why it's called that. If I click this little arrow on my single arm deformation, you'll see that there's an entirely other node system under here. It's a very simple node system. It's basically an in point, the 3 bones that we have, and an out point. But what a kinematic, what was it called? Kinematic what again? Sorry, I have to go back here. Click this little up arrow and it'll take me back. Anyway, I think it's kinematic output. What the kinematic output node does is it takes the end result of that entire hierarchy deformation and uses that as a parent node, right? So it will drive the location of the claw, which means if I wanted more rigging on the call, I could do that, right? So let's get a kinematic output node. If I right click here, insert, it's going to be under deformation, bone, and it's this kinematic output. So what we get now is if I plug this in from here to the kinematic output, and then from the kinematic output to the call, whatever happens as a result of moving this IK will also transform over to the to my call there, right? And so I can still go to my call and just rotate it at the end of this, okay? So this is another way of doing deformations and sort of creating your own rigging structure. I want that to be in front of the arm. Okay. How you feeling about that? No, okay. Okay, fair enough. You just don't like it? Okay, fair enough. That's all right. And that's one of the reasons I want to show you all of this stuff. Really, the last part of class is just time for you to take the parts you like and the parts you don't like and throw them out. The parts you like, you're going to make your own project out of it, right? But this becomes very handy for creating a full character. So I want to show you, like with this rig, once I get it built, I can do quite a bit of animation quickly. So I'm going to go way back to before I put that deformer in there. Show you that there is another kind of deformer that's kind of nice. So if I go back to this deformer node, last time I used bones, right? Bone and articulation mode. There's also this curve mode. So if I click that, it works a little different. Single arm, go back farther. So when I click one point, I can drag it. This kind of tells me the direction I'm going. And then I click another point and I get a tangent here. So you see what I'm doing is I kind of get it's kind of like when you're drawing something in Photoshop. So I'm basically getting these two tangents that I can adjust, right? And whenever I'm ready to animate, I just go back out here to this move tool, and I can do all of my animation just with these two curves, right? So I can make something go almost completely from straight to S-shaped just by animating these two nodes, right? Now, again, in order to get this rigging to work right, I have to use that kinematic output node. So again, if I go in here, turn on my base one, turn on my claw, I'm going to reorganize this again. Base one, single arm claw. I would plug base one into single arm. I would plug the single arm deformation into a insert deformation bone, and there's this kinematic output. So I plug that in from the deformation into kinematic output, and then kinematic output to claw. And so now whatever I do, and I like that claw to be in front, whatever I do to this deformation node here, the claw will kind of come along for the ride, right? And then whatever I do to this base, this platform up here, the whole thing comes along for the ride, right? So, does that make sense? What's happening? I know it's a little confusing. But this, hopefully you're getting to see the benefit of this, right? Where we were doing that with the spine earlier and having to draw completely new drawings, we could actually just deform our spine now and still get some pretty neat stuff. In fact, when you're doing a revision of this, if you're wanting to use any of these tools for that, I'm fine with that. So I'm going to take this from this, which is sort of an abstract idea, like this little claw creature, right? And I'm going to show you how to kind of quickly rig up a whole character, right? I say quickly, I may not get all the way through this. I may not even completely do this today. But this is the character. This is Bucky the Rhino. I've actually used him for a couple of different projects, but he's pretty solid in terms of how he's broken up into pieces. But he works really good for this because his arms, like right now, his arms are just in one piece, right? So if I look at that arm, it's just this one piece. You can kind of see what I was talking about earlier about how you can break this up to still make it feel like it's all one connected piece there. Like I did this in a way that like you really have to push it before you notice that it breaks under here. There's even ways that we can trick that still yet. But Bucky's pretty easy to rig in that IK way, right? If I go to my node view, oh my goodness, what's all this stuff? Oh, don't need any of that. This is what happens when I use an old file. Let me delete these really quick. Don't need you, don't need you, you. Okay. So, like, just to rig him up, like that, okay. Yeah, he's not too terribly hard because I just have to start parenting things together, right? What I usually do is I organize it in an intuitive way, right? Like his head's over here. Well, all the things that go with his head, I move over there with it. His eyes, his right ear, his left ear, right? So here's his right arm, here's his torso, here's his right leg, left leg. Let's do that the other way around. Right arm, right leg, left leg. Right? I can grab all of these and just kind of move those off to the side. And so we can kind of see very quickly, we can organize this in a way that it makes sense, right? Like this kind of even looks like the character. The torso's here. Maybe take the head there. The eyes are above that. The two ears are above that. His arms are sort of off to the side of the torso, and his legs are down here off to the side of the torso. So you can kind of see like how you can organize this in a way that it makes sense, right? And then we really just have to plug stuff into each other, right? Like the torso into the head. Oh, it's the wrong way. The torso would go into the top part of the head here. So I gotta move this. I'm doing that wrong. From the bottom of the torso into the top of the head. Oh, this is where I'm, sorry. Again, I needed to use a new file because I have this set up in layers property to apply embedded pivot to draw. Is that it? This is what I get for saying it's simple. Don't apply embedded pivot on parent code. I don't want any of those. I think I just got disconnected. That's annoying. I know I've turned something on here that I need to turn off. I don't remember what it is. I can always change it back afterwards and put it head there. If I don't have animation turned on, I can then just move my head back up, back over, and then reposition my pivot. So that's going to be a little more annoying than I thought, but then from head, I'll parent in the eyes. They're going to do the same thing. I'm not sweating it too much. I think it's where it was rigged before. It just did some different things. So I also want the head to be in control of the ears. So I'll move that up to the top of the ears. And then again, I can move those there. I want to go ahead and put the pivot in the right spot for that. Left ear, same thing. And so now I have this like torso and head control, right? I can go in here with my torso, rotate that, and his entire head goes with it, rotate his head, and that goes with it. And so I pretty much have it, and I can do this with each of his ears as well to get a little bit of a wiggle. Probably change the location a little bit of an ear wiggle. And so all of this is kind of a simple way to set this guy up for animation. However, his arms aren't really doing very much, right? So let's see if I can do this kind of quickly. Right arm, it's going to mess all this up. I'll fix it. And then right leg, left leg, that's great. Right arm, let's go ahead and move that. Okay. And then for his left leg, so yeah, that's where I'm using an old file. I've got something turned on. So all of this is together now. Again, if I go to my IK for this, animate has to be on. You can kind of see what's going on there with this, and I can manually start rotating them to get whatever animation I need out of them. Right? So all of that's very easy to animate from here. Again, that's not the only way we have to animate them though. Like if I wanted to put a deformation on these legs, I can add to this, right? Let's say I don't want a deformation on the head or any of the ears or anything, but I do on the arms and the legs, right? What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and deselect them. Ugh, that's so annoying. Let's just go ahead and do the legs first. Actually, I'm not gonna deselect them yet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this left leg, right? Or actually, let's do the right leg first. And I'm going to go ahead and put a deformer in there. So this thing, tools, property. I'm going to do the, let's do bone and articulation mode. So I'll go ahead and start up here at the top. No, I'm sorry, I'm not. I want to go ahead and do the curve mode. So I'll start at the top, click and drag to get my first tangent, right? Then go out here to the bottom, click and drag back. So it's like the direction of the tangent. So you want to take it back toward the first one. And so once I have that, I can go back to this. And so now I should be able to move the leg and do quite a bit with it, just with a few keyframes, right? So I got a completely deformable leg now. So the problem with that is that deformation, oh, it looks like it just inserted itself into the hierarchy. So that's cool. That actually worked pretty well to do that. If for some reason it didn't, let's say it was, still separate, I could plug that back in just manually to get it. So again, left leg, I could do the same thing. Add a new deformer to this. Sometimes I like to turn off the other layers just so I can see. So put one there. Oh, sorry. There, drag toward the center. There, drag toward the center. Okay, that's pretty good. Left arm, do the same thing. The center. And I'm sorry, that was the left arm. Yeah. And then right arm, do the same. So what this should mean now is that my character should be pretty much ready to animate, right? There's probably still some stuff I'm overlooking, but this is where I'm going to start working tomorrow. I could add more stuff if I wanted to. Like if I wanted to go in here, add some deformation to the head, I could go, let's do the bone tool this time. Click here for the base, and then add another one here and here. Then when I go to deform the head now, I can get just a little bit of like bobble on the head, right? So there's still a lot of different things I can do to make that work, but like I said, I should be able to go ahead and start animating now just with all of these tools, right? I have the head movement, I can animate that. I have the torso, I can animate that. All of these pieces should go with it. Connecting the feet to the ground is a little bit trickier. I can kind of show you some stuff of that. And then when I want to start deforming the character, I can go to these controls and start. Posing. Right? Of course, this is not a particularly good pose, but you get the idea. And honestly, I would probably put something in his spine too, just to be able to get some deformation on his spine. So in his torso, go back to default mode. Whoa! Apparently I don't want to do that just yet. I'll have to rethink how I'll rig that. I don't want to mess everything up right off the bat. I know how I'll have to do it. But it would be like that. I know I'm destroying everything. Perfect. So the reason I did that is because it doesn't have that kinematic output. So basically when I created that deformation on the torso, right here, everything else is not hooked into that. They're hooked directly into the torso. So I would have to unplug them all and create a kinematic output for each of those. Insert. Actually, I may only have to make one kinematic output. So deformation, bone. Plug that into that. I think that goes the other way. And so even though these are all in the wrong spot now, when I deform my character's torso, it should work. Okay, ignore this. So the rest of this, though, I should have done it in the other order. Basically, I should have created the deformation on the spine first before I put it on the legs and arms. But just kind of know that this is a way that you can deform your entire character. In fact, if you want to draw your character in a pose, like if your character is just facing the camera, you can draw your character in a relatively neutral pose and create the entire rig out of one really complex deformer. It's a little bit of extra work that way, but really this multiple deformer on different layers is sort of the way to go. On top of all of this, again, we can still redraw frames and switch in and out of those. So I know that got a little confusing at the end there. What I'm going to do tomorrow is I'm going to bring in another character. I'm going to completely rig that character. If you want to have your character ready to go too, you can completely rig it as well. And I'm going to try to do one of our animations. It's either going to be a walk cycle or a run cycle or the jump or something like that. And we're just going to spend a little bit of time learning how to do this. I have a little bit of a lecture on some of these animations specifically. And then from there, it's going to be a lot more work time for you getting a couple of those animations together however you want to. Again, I'm showing you how to create this rig. Not all of the animations you create for these projects have to be with this rig. But I do think the run cycle, or the run and the walk cycle, will be easier on a rigged character once you get it rigged. So I would encourage you to follow along, even if you're like, this doesn't seem fun or this seems overwhelming. But if you go through this hard part, you may only use 10% of it later, but you will use that 10% well. So kind of bear with me, and if you can come in with whatever character you're wanting to animate, at least a rough version of them, we can get that rigged up and start making it run or walk. So, any questions? I'm sure you have a lot of questions about the rigging parts. Go back and watch some of the video again if you're wanting to start tinkering around with this yourself. It's overwhelming when I throw it all out there at you. It becomes way more manageable as we go along. So, all right, cool. Feel free to hang around for the rest of class, but otherwise. If you can break it up into the rig parts like this guy is, you could probably work along with me while I'm doing it. You don't have to, but that'll be the character you'll be animating on. And again, it can be the character you use for the previous project, or you can do it completely new one, certain blocks.
So you have to make the individual drawings when you have to deform it like that?
You don't have to. I mean, no, you can. So you can deform keyframes. Like, let me. Let's just discard that. That will not work. Actually, let me go ahead and stop my.